I was asked to bring forward some thoughts about risk and vulnerability, and I have lots of ideas. I'd like to talk with you more about what we really know about learning, because I think we tend to focus on learning as knowledge acquisition and not as the mastery of all the skills that allow us to engage with one another. So I think there may be some areas where we could do a good deal more to enhance our understanding. But sticking to risk and vulnerability, I wanted to raise the point. A lot of the frameworks that we've talked about have been very good at looking at changes. What they haven't done is what would make the vulnerability people crazy, is they treat the society as, I think what Susie termed it as a blob. The vulnerability community is very concerned about the level of differentiation within society and how the impacts of different actions play out across various people. I want to go back to just a point I made earlier about, as we think about these systems, how easy it is to develop metrics that see a system functioning very well, because people who are marginal are not particularly significant to the function of the system by definition. And that's one of those transformational issues that we might think about as we develop metrics of resilience and which kinds of definitions are moving forward. The major thing that has stuck with me in these discussions are a variety that we haven't spent a lot of time on, and maybe we could think about it as we talk about engaging decision makers and as we think about research agendas, are the questions about dynamics. So when I work with decision makers, I can say, well, climate is changing, but then I say, well, when should you do something? What is the strategic point? What should you do when? And we haven't gotten to a point where I think that we've addressed uncertainty enough to begin to offer advice around that, but there are a couple of kinds of dynamics I'd like us to think about a little bit more. One is about the issue of rates of change, and which things are changing quickly and have the potential to change quickly in society, and which ones move very slowly. So we can imagine, they talk about a great deal in biology. We know that climate is changing faster than the ability of some species to migrate or for habitats to develop to become suitable for particular kinds of species. So without anyone getting anxious about how I'm going to use biological metaphors for society, I'd like to talk about, everybody calm, it's early, that there's also potential that some changes, that we should recognize that some changes in society happen very quickly and some move very slowly. So while we're understanding that nuisance flooding is increasing, our typical mechanisms for increasing the quality of building infrastructure are things like requiring people to upgrade things as they remodel their homes. More like a 25-year cycle than the 5-year kinds of changes we're seeing. And so there are these mismatches in rates, and you can think about other mechanisms that are even more mired. The National Flood Insurance Program, and even the questions we have right now about infrastructure in the United States, where we've known for the past 25, 30 years that our infrastructure is degrading, but that issue hasn't been addressed, and there's been the long-term trend of declining resilience while adaptation needs have increased. Along with that, I wanted to bring out the issue of path dependence. Kirstin from Baltimore talked about addressing the historic patterns of disinvestment. I thought that was a great example of not necessarily going for the low-hanging fruit, but taking on the expensive long-term issues that are part of this story. But again, to that strategic issue, when and how do you do the path dependence transformation? And there aren't very many examples yet of strategically thinking through where those decision points are. I think about the work on the Thames River as one example of identifying strategic decision points as knowledge becomes more certain, but I don't have many more examples, maybe others do. Another question about the dynamics is that for good reasons, many of our illustrations have been primarily oriented to single events. But what we're seeing in the communities in North Carolina and in other parts, or in the Carolinas and other parts of the world, is the already occurring issues of sequences of events. So we've worked with communities in eastern North Carolina, flat, rural, relatively low income, hit very badly by Hurricane Irene, and offered support to rebuild through the FEMA process. But the support to rebuild is a low interest loan. when the next storm comes up, like Hurricane Joaquin did, people are terrified as they know that their resilience is eroding through these sequences of events. And that underlying dynamic is a particular concern. Other places, it's the repeated turning to the city coffers and looking for the money to renourish that beach that's once again eroded, and they're trying to maintain their economic base while doing that. We can think about it from around the world. The final one I'd like to just reintroduce to the discussion is the issue of cascades and how able we are to go from primary impacts to secondary impacts and understand what those mean for the long-term resilience of a community. And I'm grateful for people for picking up the question about, well, what does it mean for long-term employment and the well-being of households as job situations might become disrupted by flooding that closes the hotel, that means that people are temporarily out of work, and so on and so forth, those kinds of cross-sectoral impacts. And we can think about it globally as well. One of the good examples that's come out recently is the societal teleconnections around the coffee production industry. How many coffee drinkers in the room? All right, okay. So you appreciate that somebody's got a boom crop, somebody's got a drought, the patterns of prices are changing globally, and that means different things for small-scale producers who are getting pennies on, maybe pennies on the dollar for the value of coffee. And so beginning to understand how those patterns work out is, I think, a challenge I'd like to insert into this, and I'm done.